I'm Wallach from Public Citizen, and thank you for joining this call about the Trans-Pacific Partnership Singapore Ministerial meeting that just ended. When the do-or-die Ministerial ended 7 hours ago, thankfully, the much vaunted 2013 deadline for sealing a deal on TPP had been missed. However, one outrageous outcome was that U.S. negotiators bullied many countries into agreeing to damaging medicine patents and medicine pricing rules demanded by large pharmaceutical firms that will drastically raise medicine prices and restrict access to generic drugs. I want to call reporters' attention to 2 separate recent letters in which key Democrats have expressed opposition to the U.S. intellectual property rules in the TPP on patent the rules on drug pricing. One group noted that the proposed rules will create new barriers to use of generic drugs and other low-cost medicines offered by U.S. government programs such as Medicare, Medicaid, TRICARE, and the VA. And Representative Waxman reiterated how inappropriate it is to have a 12-year data exclusivity for biologics. If, as has been reported by folks, including my staff on the ground in Singapore, the U.S. did get the other countries to agree to its proposal, that would be a major rollback of the May 2007 deal to improve access to medicines made between House Democrats and President Bush. It's my honor to now introduce our first speaker, Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro, Democrat of Connecticut, co-chair of the Democratic Policy and Steering Committee. Congresswoman.
Thanks so much, Lori. I'm delighted to join all of you and my colleagues, and particularly to acknowledge my colleague Louise, who's been a leader on trade issues and continues her work to ensure that American manufacturers can better compete in foreign markets. And so pleased to be with Gerard, Hoffa, Larry Cohen, Mike Brune, all of whom are leading champions of the working people and for environmental protection. The Obama administration failed to sign this agreement at the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit in October as originally intended, and have now failed to announce a deal coming out of Singapore. And the reason for this failure is that there are significant unresolved issues with other countries, as well as with the Congress, which has the final say when it comes to trade matters in the United States. For example, currency discipline, critical for leveling the playing field for American workers, have reportedly not even been discussed, even though Congress has been very vocal on this issue. For Congresswoman Slaughter and myself, our colleague Mike Michaud led a bipartisan effort that got more than half of all House members, 230, to sign a letter urging the administration to include currency discipline in the agreement. A similar letter in the Senate was signed by 60 senators. And as Lori has discussed, there is continued concern in the Congress on the U.S. position with regard to the intellectual property chapter and access to affordable medicines both overseas and at home for our constituents who are using Medicare, Medicaid, and other programs. And finally, many in the Congress are concerned that, like its predecessors, this trade agreement will cost rather than add jobs to the U.S. economy. In fact, this country has lost more than 5 million manufacturing jobs and millions of other service sector jobs since the North America Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, or the World Trade Organization went into effect. It's important to remember also that Fast Track authority will be needed to pass any TPP agreement. And under the most recent iteration of Fast Track, which expired in 2007, U.S. trade negotiations required various stages of congressional consultation before and during the negotiation. It also requires that the administration consult with all committees of the House and Senate with jurisdiction over laws that would be affected by a trade agreement. And it mandated the creation of a congressional oversight group of these committees. Yet, even that level of congressional consultation has not occurred, which is why 151 Democrats joined a letter I led making clear that the old fast track mechanism is a non-starter. Many others from both sides of the aisle have also made clear that any new trade authority given to the executive branch must enhance Congress's role throughout the process, as it is Congress, the Congress that has the constitutional authority over trade matters in the United States. The failure in Singapore makes clear that the administration is far from reaching an agreement with other countries. And I also add emphatically that it should also be clear that it is far from reaching a deal that the Congress can support. And with that, let me turn things back to you, Laurie.
Thank you very much and for your leadership. Gerard is the president of the United Steelworkers, one of our country's leading manufacturing unions and a longtime fair trade champion. President Gerard.
Thanks, Laurie, and hopefully we can get Congresswoman Slaughter back on. Let me be very explicit that I've been trying to do a bit of mathematics about this, and I want to put it in its perspective. I want to try to regurgitate some facts that seem to often get ignored. And all the trade deals we've done since 1994, for those of you that are from the press that are on the line and our friends in the political process, I think these are important numbers you should take very close look at. In the period of time from 1994 to October of 2013, America has accumulated an overall trade deficit of $8.3 trillion. And if you subtract goods and services where we've been able to export certain services like accounting and stuff like that, that we have a slight surplus. And if you extract that, then the surplus, the deficit in manufactured goods is over $10 trillion. This should be the deficit that we're looking at, rather than the one that keeps getting thrown up by some Democrats and right-wing Republicans. And then if you go through this deal, before you look at this deal, you got to look at all the previous deals and say which one of the trade deals that we've done has resulted in net job gains and net trade surplus for America. You know what the answer is? None. And so in this deal, they're looking at what are we going to do? What are we going to do about state-owned enterprises that we're supposed to compete with? We've got workers that compete with any company, but they can't compete with countries. What are we going to do about rules of origin? And if you look at the rules of origin, and again, put things in perspective. For example, in NAFTA, to be country of origin, you need 62.5% domestic content. The U.S.-Australia deal went to 50%. The U.S.-South Korea deal, free trade agreement, went to 35%. Where will this one take us? So if you put it in perspective, we're supposed to compete with countries that will get their parts from China and Vietnam and Brunei and exporting materials to here, when if they have 35% of their material from their country, they're called a domestic product. That's crazy. What are we going to do about Congresswoman DeLauro said currency discipline. What are we going to do about currency manipulation? And these deals are being negotiated in secret. And my comment is, why are they being negotiated in secret? And I want to see a trade deal. We're not against trade in the Steelworkers Union. We're against trade that continues to cost us jobs. We're against trade that makes us compete against countries as opposed to against companies. And the fact of the matter is that there has not been a trade deal. And I would like everybody to check that. There's not been a trade deal, whether it was with NAFTA, whether it was with Korea, whether it was with PNTR with China, whether it's trade deal with Australia. There's none of those trade deals that have resulted in net job gains. There's none of them that have resulted in net trade surpluses. And I appreciate comments that were made by Congressman DeLauro and was being made by Congresswoman Slaughter before we lost her, that this has to all go through fast track, and that we shouldn't give them fast track in any way, because the fact of the matter is that the Constitution and the laws are that these trade deals should be the decision of Congress, not the decisions that are made in secret and then brought for an up and down vote. So the Steelworkers Union is aggressively opposed to the kind of trade deals we've been negotiating, and would like to be part of a trade deal that actually created net jobs in America. So Laurie, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you very much, President Gerard. Congresswoman Slaughter, have you dialed back in?
Yes, I'm back.
Thank Thank you so much. We're driving to Washington. It's not a very pleasant experience, and I hope my phone's not badly. But anyway, I'll start right in here. Under the United States Constitution, Congress is empowered to write the nation's laws and set trade policy. But fast track authority is an undemocratic seizure of power that usurps our ability to represent the American people. And while I served as the chairwoman of the House Rules Committee in 2008, I led the successful vote to prevent fast track authority from being granted to the Colombian trade deal. Now, since then, the authority to fast track agreements and bypass congressional oversight has expired, and there's absolutely no reason why it should be renewed. Now, the supporters of fast track want to bring it back to pass the TPP, and it's easy to see why. The proponents know that it will benefit the multinational corporations at the expense of American manufacturers and workers. That's the same reason that TPP is negotiated in spirit, and I think my colleague Rosa DeLauro brought out many of the problems with that. So during my time in Congress, 20 years, I have never seen a single trade agreement that benefited American workers or American producers. And the flawed free trade agreements like NAFTA have destroyed American manufacturers and American jobs for more than 20 years, and we have to stop that from happening again. Just 2 years ago, we passed a trade agreement with South Korea. This year, our trade deficit with South Korea will be the biggest on record, and that is not coincidence. The members of Congress must not continue to surrender our authority and power. I was not elected to Congress to send away jobs, and I'm pleased to stand with my colleagues today to oppose the lack of congressional input in the trade deals and continue to fight to end the era of giveaway trade. Thank you, Laurie. Thank you, Congresswoman Slaughter. It's my honor to introduce Communication Workers of America President Larry Cohen, one of our nation's leading fighters for international labor rights. President Cohen.
Thanks a lot, and great to be on this call with my labor colleague, with Lori, members of Congress, and with Mike Brune from Sierra. I would stress more than anything the enormous coalition for, as Leo put it, fair trade and against this deal, and particularly against fast track. The ironies of Article 2 of the Constitution, which provide that treaties need supermajorities, and we go up to the other extreme. This is clearly a treaty, but we call it legislation, and then we fast track it so it gets no amendments. And when you compare that to the obstruction in Congress, it's unbelievable. But this gets these deals that are thousands of pages and have all kinds of hidden benefits for the largest multinationals. They zip right through. Let me focus on something a bit different, which is we've been losing service sector jobs at the same pace as manufacturing jobs in the last 5 years. As Leo said, we need to look at net results, net exports minus imports, and net results on jobs. The 600 multinationals that are promoting this, including many from the service sector, they're looking at their net profit. We need to look at net jobs. We've lost 500,000 call center jobs alone in the last 5 years, virtually all of them to Southeast Asia. And yet we continue to behave as if somehow these trade deals help us. As Representative Slaughter said, the deficit with Korea has doubled in the 2 years since we passed Korea FTA, where we were again told by the USTR to focus on exports growing. Well, what about the imports that grew at 4 times the level of the exports? That's what's at stake here. Our union is committed to mobilizing tens of thousands of members with our coalition partners on this. We are already doing it. We couldn't be prouder of Representative DeLauro for leading the letter that had about 150 members, Democratic members of Congress, also Representative Jones and others, about 25 Republican members, and then other letters that total about 200 members of Congress already opposed to this. The key right now for us all is TPA. No fast track. We need transparency. We need a way where the American people and our congressional leaders can be involved. Thank you, Lori.
Thank you very much, President Cohen. It's my honor to introduce Teamsters President James Hoffa. Teamsters is one of our nation's largest unions. President Hoffa.
Well, thank you. It's
pleasure and an honor to be on this press conference with members of Congress that are standing up for American workers and my colleagues in the labor movement. The Teamsters echo what other people have said. First of all, with regard to TPP, we oppose TPP because it's not transparent. We would go along with an agreement if it had what we all want. Number one, Buy America procurement chapter, a labor chapter that lets people organize, an environmental chapter that protects the environment, a chapter that says no investor-state dispute, which gives countries more power for an American citizen to sue us and tie us up in court, and also protections for food safety for family farmers. These are things that have to be in any agreement. And also currency manipulation, which I understand has not been brought up, but is the biggest issue which Congress is concerned about. But before anything happens with TPP, we have to talk about Fast Track. Fast Track is expired. This administration has to come to Congress and get Fast Track. And the answer is, how can they come and ask for people to give them Fast Track when they haven't released the proposals that they've made to TPP and have not been transparent? Now, we know they're still negotiating, but what are they negotiating? Why are they not sharing this with us so that we know what's going on? Share it with the public, share it with the press, and most of all, share it with Congress. Share it with the people that are going to be playing a role in voting for Fast Track. I don't know how any member of Congress can vote for Fast Track until he knows what's in the agreement. And it's not enough to say, oh, we're going to eventually give it to you. It'll be 1,000 pages and we'll give it to you and you can vote it up or down. The answer is, under the Constitution, the members of Congress have an input into these trade agreements. As we've all said, we've seen from NAFTA to CAFTA to WTO to South Korea, all of these agreements have been the same. They've all been losers for America. American jobs are being, basically exported. That's what's going on. Everybody knows it. And for people to put their heads in the sand and say, oh, trade agreements are good, they're not playing with the truth. They're not looking at what the facts are. These have been a disaster for America. We've tried to convince the administration not to pursue this line. Now, basically, NAFTA was a failure, and lately, it was the same group of people on this phone that said South Korea will be a disaster. They went ahead and passed it, and exactly what we said, a hemorrhaging of American jobs, their trade surplus going way up, ours going down. It's not working. And it's time for us to basically stand up. And the first level, the first fight is going to be over Fast Track. I urge members of Congress to stand up. Let's say no Fast Track. We want transparency. And until you do that, it ain't going to happen. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, President Hoffa. It's my honor to introduce Michael Brune, who is the Executive Director of the Sierra Club, our nation's largest and oldest environmental group with members across the country. Mike.
Thanks, Lori. Good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to be joining my friends Gerard, Larry Cohen, Mr. James Hoffa, and our two congresswomen. As you've heard, leaders in Singapore have missed another self-imposed deadline for completing the TPP. And this demonstrates once again not only how controversial this pact is, but it also calls into question whether leaders will ever be able to reach agreement or what compromises will be made in order to do so. The Sierra Club is deeply concerned about the effect of this pact on working families in America, communities, our environment, and our climate. As trade expands, so does the potential for illegal trade in natural resources, such as trees and even wildlife parts, such as rhino horn or shark fins. Now, to prevent these harmful practices, the Sierra Club and our 2.1 million members and supporters are calling for a strong and binding environment chapter of the TPP that includes a ban on the trade of illegally harvested timber, wildlife, and fish. We're also calling for an end to cruel practices like shark finning. The environment chapter has to ensure that countries uphold not only their own domestic environmental laws, but also commitments that are made under multilateral environmental agreements. We understand that the USTR has been vocal in pushing for these provisions, and we know it's backed by strong support of many members of Congress. However, we understand that the strong U.S. proposals have still not been agreed to, and may be at serious risk of being rolled back by other nations. So let's be clear, the Sierra Club would strongly oppose an agreement that does not include a fully enforceable and binding environment chapter that meaningfully addresses the conservation challenges of the region. And we believe members of Congress would as well. What's more, the rules in the PAC's investment chapter threaten protections that we have for our air, our water, and our climate. The so-called investor-state disputes settlement rules give corporate polluters the power to challenge almost any public interest policies that they disagree with, allowing foreign corporations to sue a government for almost any law, environmental or otherwise, that the corporation argues might hurt its bottom line. Big polluters use these kind of trade rules again and again. Just 2 months ago, U.S. energy firm Lone Pine Resources used similar rules in NAFTA to challenge a fracking moratorium in Canada. Corporations should not be able to undo all the progress that we have made in environment policy, nor should they be able to roll back any public interest law, whether it's good for the environment or good for working families, just because they happen to disagree with it. Period. So given the broad implications that this pact will have on American families and workers, the Sierra Club is very troubled that after years of negotiations, the text of this agreement has still not been made public. It is beyond time to release the text of this sweeping agreement so that we can have a serious public debate about the effects of this pact on our economy, our children's health, and our climate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael Brune. So we are now going to shift to question and answers. I'm going to ask reporters to identify themselves, try and keep your question brief, let any of our speakers have a go. Before we go, though, I just want to reiterate one important fact with respect to what all of our speakers have said about Fast Track. It has grown increasingly controversial as trade agreements have increasingly invaded Congress's core behind-the-border policymaking territory. Fast Track has only been in effect for 5 of the last 18 years. Since NAFTA and WTO passed, Fast Track has only been in effect for 5 years. With that, may I please have the first question?
Hi. I'll start off. It's Howard with the Washington Post. Boy, I just wanted to, in your opening statement, you said that you felt countries had been bullied into an agreement on the, I guess you were speaking specifically on the medicine ban. Isn't it a bit presumptuous? Can't these countries just say no on their own? You seem to be consigning 11 nations to kind of vassalage under the U.S. there, and I just think that's a bit presumptuous of you.
No, it's actually not presuming what the other countries did. It's knowing what the process was. Although this meeting was in Singapore and ostensibly hosted by Singapore, in fact, the U.S. set up the methodology and the agenda. And among other things, that involved the U.S. organizing sub-meetings where only a few countries were invited, typically isolating the one country from the group of 6 to oppose the U.S. intellectual property rules to be brought into a room with all the other countries to be pilloried. And the U.S. also prepared texts in advance of this negotiation that were submitted to be the papers on which the talks were carried, in contrast to the typical process of using agreements negotiated by all the countries in bracket form. So in fact, the U.S. process and ran the process. And in fact, in leaving the ministerial plenary, one of the other country's negotiators laughingly said, "Boy, that Froman's a hard taskmaster." So that's what I have in mind. Next question.
So wait a minute, Roy. I just wanted to say, this is Rosa, DeLauro. There's been plenty of reporting on, and quite frankly, it's through the leaking of information, because we've all understood the lack of transparency surrounding this agreement, that on a whole variety of issues that the U.S. has been strong-arming other countries.
Dave Thomas, Inside U.S. Trade. Seeing as how it's, at this point in the game, it's unlikely that the Obama administration will radically change its positions in the TPP. Do you anticipate, and this is for each of you, do you anticipate that you'll end up opposing the TPP? And if so, what are you going to do to generate opposition to the agreement?
Let me jump in. It's Gerard. We're totally going to oppose this agreement. and I regurgitated a bunch of facts. The fact of the matter is that unless they could, as President Hoffa said, unless they could deal with the kind of issues that President Hoffa's addressed and I've addressed and Larry Cohen's addressed and Mike Brune's addressed, what you're going to find out is that this is going to be another deal that's going to have net job loss for America. It's going to increase net trade deficit. And I pose the question to all of you in the press that are on the line. If having a $8 trillion accumulated trade debt is a good economic policy, why doesn't any other nation want one? If having an accumulated trade deficit with China of $3 trillion is a good economic policy, why doesn't China want a trade deficit? The fact of the matter is that our trade agreements have become parts of foreign policy agendas, and what we've been doing is giving away our jobs, giving away our kids' seed corn, giving away our economic security, giving away our environmental security. And as I said in my comments, and as Jimmy and Larry and Mike Brune have said, we're not opposed to trade. We're just opposed to trade that keeps giving away our jobs and keeps giving away our future. And here's the challenge. If trade is good, the way these trade deals have been negotiated, find me a country where we've generated a net job gain and a net trade balance or surplus. It doesn't exist. So why do we keep chasing the same bad economic policy that's going to keep giving away industrial and service jobs now, keep destroying our environment? A ton of steel brought from China creates 3 times the carbon emissions as a ton of steel made in America, and we see that the Chinese steel industry is trying to destroy not just the American steel industry, but the global steel industry, adding to our environmental pollution. So you're damn right we're going to oppose it.
Yeah, Larry Cohen, we're opposed, and we're equally opposed to TPA. We need trade policy, not a policy set by the 600 large multinational corporations. We have no jobs policy or trade policy here at all. What we have is a massive giveaway, and whether it's environmental or labor or jobs or medicine, there's nothing in this for the American people.
I'll chime in. It's Rosa DeLauro. They are nowhere close to an agreement. We don't know what's in it. There's a lack of transparency. They need fast track authority to move. And we have 180. They don't have the votes to do that. You have 185 people. That's Republicans and Democrats who are on the record saying that if the current fast track procedures are not changed, then there will be opposition. And what will we do? We will continue to organize that opposition against this treaty.
Next question, please.
Will Malden with the Wall Street Journal.
Yes, Will.
Hi, thanks so much for hosting this. For the Congresswoman here and anybody else who wants to chime in, looking at the administration's strategy, they haven't achieved the TPP deal as hoped this year. If they were to change tack and try to shore up support for the agreement overseas with Japan and with U.S. constituencies in the Hill, addressing some of the issues that are provoking the most concerns: labor, environment, currency, the way fast track has been done in the past. Would you guys be able to support the deal, and would you expect the administration to do that, to change tack? Thanks.
I don't anticipate a changing of tack, to be very honest with you. They've been negotiating this for well over a year. I'll just give you one example, which is a personal example, because I've, from the outset, have had serious concerns to the issues that are regarding food safety. I sought September 2011 to engage the USTR early in the process because my concern is about the influx of contaminated seafood. We see that from Vietnam all of the time, and we're going to have Malaysia as part of the agreement as well. There was no reciprocal effort by USTR to work together. The following year, I joined Senator Landrieu, Walter Jones, the other side of the aisle, in proposing bilateral agreements with Vietnam and Malaysia to address these issues. They didn't engage in that effort. We have until I really spoke in an open hearing and I questioned Secretary Vilsack, did we at least get a phone call returned that said that they wanted to have some conversation. I don't see any changing. Now, this is an agreement that is not your standard trade agreement. It goes beyond tariffs. In order to open this up again, if they want to do this, you got to deal with all of the committees in Congress that have some jurisdiction here. That is what we talked about in the last go-round, as to deal with the range of committees, and there are a number of committees because of the scope of this treaty, which goes beyond what treaties have done in the past. So I don't see any openness on the administration's part to change their tactics in dealing on this agreement.
Thank you.
Let me add to that a little bit. I've written to the president because of my major concern with Vietnam war tariff and easy agreement, which is in my district. I've not even had a response. Just to share with you, the first speaker was Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro. That was just Congresswoman Louise and Hickey Freeman is the high-end men's suit maker. One last question. Hearing none.
Actually, I have another quick question. Dave Thomas, Inside U.S. Trade. This is mostly for the unions, but I mean, if the Congresswoman would like to chime in as well. To what extent is trade a priority for each of you, and what kind of resources do you plan to commit if you do decide to oppose TPP? If the agreement comes out and it says bad as you think it's going to be.
Well, this is Gerard. Let me just say that if you check our track record and the track record of my other colleagues on this phone, who can speak for themselves, we're tired of losing jobs. We're tired of trade agreements that end up with net job loss. Our members are fed up of it. The public is fed up of it. The public is ahead of the politicians on this. The politicians keep telling us the same song and dance that never comes out to be the truth. And our members understand that we've lost literally tens of thousands of industrial jobs, many of them in our union. Because of this, we've lost 5 million manufacturing jobs. The public gets it. The politicians don't. And we're going to do everything we can on fast track and on trying to get, as I'll keep saying, we're not against trade. We're just against trade that keeps causing us to lose industrial jobs and service sector jobs.
Yes, Larry, again, we're totally mobilizing behind people like Representative DeLauro and her letter, appreciating and encouraging those who signed on, and the other letters that we talked about. And I would just say we're mobilizing across the country, not just here in the Beltway.
This is Jim Hoffa. We're doing the same thing. We're very sensitive to the issue of trade. We've seen the damage that NAFTA has done, the NAFTA, the WTO in South Korea, and this is just another agreement like that. It starts with fast track. We are lobbying and talking to members of Congress, alerting them to the problem, telling them to stand up, vote against fast track, have input. And we're talking not only to Democrats, but we're talking to Republicans. We're talking across the aisle. This is not a Democrat or Republican issue. This is an American issue to get an agreement that is good for America. We've had a number of agreements that are bad for America. No matter what they say, NAFTA was bad for America because it exported hundreds of thousands of American jobs. And everybody on this phone can tell you company after company that closed down in the middle of the night, laid its workers off, put the presses on a train, and sent them to Mexico. I can give you a dozen places, and I know Larry can with regard to call centers, and I know that Leo can. So we've seen the damage. We are mobilizing people to realize what is at stake here. When are we going to sign a trade agreement that's good for America, that opens up markets and puts Americans to work here to ship good American products overseas? Isn't that the answer? Shouldn't that be our goal? Unfortunately, that's not the goal for this administration.
And I'm going to say, this is Rosa DeLauro, and my colleague Louise Slaughter, I know, and she will speak up on this issue as well. What we have seen is the significant loss of American jobs. And I will tell you that when I voted against NAFTA at that time, in a public document at that time, the administration then said those of us who voted against NAFTA were thugs, quite frankly. And that you don't forget those those kinds of things. We are for trade. We don't have our heads in the sand. What we are not for is the loss of intellectual property, the loss of jobs, the loss of technology over and over and over again, which puts us at a disadvantage and is in the world globally, and particularly just depresses the economic security of people and families in this nation. That is what the history of these trade agreements is about, and we are not going to continue to take it.
Thank you, Congresswoman DeLauro. Any final closing comments from any other speaker?
This is Michael Brune from the Sierra Club, sorry for interrupting. I just wanted to add that the Sierra Club has been working on trade issues for well more than a decade right now. We realize that we have to have strong communities, we have to have strong protections for American workers as we work to protect our air, our water, and our climate. And we have been mobilizing our volunteers and members across the country, in just about every state, to push for a good agreement that will support trade that works for families as well as our environment. And we will continue to fight the development of this TPP until we win.
I just want to close the call by saying that the same fighting spirit, outrage, and passion you heard today from leaders of major U.S. civil society leaders and some of our most senior members of the U.S. Congress is the same sense in other TPP countries, which may explain why there is such a desperate rush to close a deal rather than getting a good deal. In every country, as word comes out about what this deal would do to working people, the environment, consumer safety, opposition is growing. So with that, I will say please email me if you want the connection to the recording of the call. That's Wallach, L-W-A-L-L-A-C-H, at citizen.org. We will, of course, also post it out on our website. If you want it first and quickly, me at Wallach at citizen.org. Thank you very much to all of our speakers, and thank you, reporters, for coming on the call on this snowy day. Bye-bye.